I'd like to welcome you. I'm Dan Cowley with contractor Hanford Mission Integration Solutions, and we welcome you. This meeting is being recorded for those of you who are joining us virtually. On your device, it might vary from place to place, and be sure and turn that off so everyone can hear. Tonight's event is a chance to view Hanford's on Hanford Energy, along with the support of the regulators, the EPA, Washington State Department of Ecology, continue to make progress toward immobilizing Hanford's low activity tank waste. You'll hear more about that term tonight, and you'll also hear about the program that we're using, and that's called Direct Feed Low Activity Waste. We call it DFLAW for short. Now, before we get right to the presentation, we have a few quick technical details. As we begin tonight, you're going to use the chat feature in Microsoft Teams. It's where you see the thought bubble on your device, and just click on that. That's where tonight's meeting materials are, and it's also where you can submit your comments. We want you to fill out an evaluation about how we did tonight, so we'd appreciate all of that input, and we appreciate your participation and our comments. If you're calling in using the phone-only option, please be sure to not hang up not put the phone on mute. It could give us some feedback, maybe some elevator music. Just hang up the phone and call back if you need to. And please stay on mute. To get off mute from the phone is *6, and then *6 will put you right back onto mute. Lastly, you can submit your questions anytime using the chat box. Colleen Drinkard is right here to help with that, and she can read your questions, or you can just indicate that you'd like to introduce other people who have come here to present to us. We have VOE's Brian Harkins, Bill Hamill, Ray Jones, Tom Fletcher, John Price, and Dave Newman. So thank you all for coming to speak with us. We appreciate that. And we will just go ahead and go right ahead, Greg. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Richland Public. We have an agenda. I'm going to cover something real quickly on all of our meetings. So if you're out in the footwear, eyewear, gloves if necessary. Sorry about that. So, checking the floor. Yeah, no worries. The first thing we have tonight is the word pretty said, right? So, just continuing my safety topic. So, if you go on site, you need to have all the topics, equipment, etc. What I want to talk about is relate that to your home. We're getting into the season where you're going to do yard work. I did a bunch of yard work yesterday. We didn't put it around because when you get old, doing yard work. But one of the things we may not remember as we're doing things around our home is to also wear proper protection. The chainsaw, so I have proper eyewear. Digging in the soil, you should always wear gloves because if you have an open wound or anything, you get staph infection, which can be very, very serious. So the point is not only at work or whatever, but at home, try to make sure that you use the proper protection to ensure your own safety. And it can be easy just to do something fast, do it right, because it's very after our agenda. So we do have an agenda here. We're going to cover a few things. We're going to talk about our cleanup plans, fiscal year 2025 priorities, and then we'll have lots of time for questions and answers if necessary. That's the DOE side, and then of course the regulators are also going to. The Hanford site, our budget is really down to two mission lines. Being our risk reduction objectives, where we take waste treatment mission, or low kidney waste and high level waste mission, Pacific Plateau and Columbia River Corridor risk reduction activities, which you're familiar with, and then we have a mission that is run for since 1989, the cleanup mission. Look at our life cycle costs, did the FEMA report, somewhere around 250 to $300 billion for road costs. So we have significant vision out in front of it. As that work, we make sure their infrastructure, roads to roads, power, sewer, et cetera, have a we also have what's called a 5-year plan. It's a whole 5-year plan that we devise to support a discussion of what our risks are, place mapping, this year, and then the work develop and roll it out for 5 years. So I think it's a pretty effective tool. And so the current one runs from 2023 to 2027. Next slide, please. So a new slide we're trying. I'm not sure if I'm sold part of it first. So at any time during the Hanford budget cycle or any federal budget cycle, you're working on 3 budgets. So we're currently executing the FY23 budget. For a while now, we're under omnibus, which is the best budget Hanford's ever had, $2.8 billion. The FY24 budget is currently still into the executive branch. We work to get the agency, to get the R&D, and then of course it goes to administration. And in the next few weeks, the rollout from the president to the Congress will occur on the FY24 budget. And now, the reason we're here tonight is to talk about the formulation of the fiscal year 2025 budget. Here to get input, we briefed the regulators on this a couple weeks ago. And now we're trying to get public input. We briefed the tribal governments last week. So our job is to try and figure out what rules and public priorities are for it. The upper arrow is really talking about sort of internal to our processes, talk about the our strategic vision, our own integrated priority list, which relates to the 5-year plan I talked about. And that all is utilized to affect inform our budget process. So moving on to the next slide and talk about our DD priorities. So this is fairly constant, but I do think it is important. For our people to ensure that people go home in the same year as if they come to work. That's very important to us, whether it's an office worker, a construction worker, a truck driver, it doesn't matter. We want everybody to go home in the same shape as they came to work. So ensuring that all the mechanisms are in place to do that is important. Clearly going back to the mission line we talked about before, managing through the end of this position. Aging structure, that we're doing a proper risk reduction there. Demolishing retired facilities. We've had tremendous success on this over the years. If you go out and look at the 300 area, get past the 324 building and others, and you look at that empty field on the right, put down hundreds of facilities in the 300 area over time. We're doing the same thing on the river, north around the reactor. That's another big factor. We do that if we work around it, especially all sorts of areas, but there's a lot of waste coming in. We've dealt with a lot of them around it. But here take forward of the reactors along the river. Contaminated groundwater is a key mission line for us. Very successful. We do 2 to 2.2 billion gallons per year. And that's just the amount of pumping actually the amount of material that we have to get out of the groundwater. So that's an important thing. And then maintaining infrastructure to support the mission. I talked about that. Long-term mission. So we got to make sure that we have the right infrastructure in place, additional power lines, roadways, all the other factors. The very personal operating.
Hi, I'm Jen Fulford with Community Office of sounds great in here. Having some issues, people can't hear on Teams and they love to hear what's happening. We're going to start with you. What?
I really don't want to.
Yeah, because it's kind of a big.
Do an audio test?
Here, yeah, I might get feedback, so.
Good.
Can everyone hear me? Can everyone hear me okay?
Coming through, is this red?
Can everyone hear me okay?
We're getting much better.
Yeah, I think. That's pretty good.
It doesn't sound like you hear it here now.
Can everybody hear me in here?
That's.
Yeah, let's go. Technic,
Feedback in the chat.
They have random sense.
Sounded better.
Okay.
Good job. Thank you for the pause and intermission. Go ahead, I'll give it back to you, Dana.
Now is everyone in the room good to go? Ready to
is
start?
everyone back from 5-minute break?
Okay, and then does it sound like on the chat, the
We're getting good, yeah.
virtually or?
Everybody ready to roll. Okay, starting on slide 6. Again, I'm Tom Fletcher. I'm the assistant manager for waste treatment plant. For those that don't know me, I think everybody in this room knows me, but if you didn't, that's who I am. Starting on slide 6, gonna go briefly over the Hanford budget, and then we'll get into the discussions of kind of what the work scope is for 2025. From a board officer protection standpoint, I think it's important to note across the board, both within tank farm and WCP, we saw an increase to support the tank waste mission that Greg did a good job covering of one of the main risk reduction activities here on the Hanford site that really drive that mission risk. And so you can see an increase of $1.73 billion budget for ORP this year, increases in high level waste. Big increase in high level waste this year as we see the ramp down of DF law, i.e. going to operations. So the construction aspect of that is ramping down, and you see the increase of high level waste coming back into play with a $392 million. And then one thing to note is you don't see TBI on here, but it is fully funded from previous year appropriations. And work is expected to take place this year on that project. I think that's all I have to cover. For 2024, as Greg mentioned, we are awaiting president's budget. And as soon as president's budget comes out, we will populate that column of what the president's budget is for fiscal year 24. We continue to see good support across the Congress for our appropriations. On to slide 7, for those at home. So direct feed low activity waste, I think everybody knows the importance of direct feed low activity waste and the vitrification of the low activity waste here at the Hanford site. We've been working on this and really has been at the forefront since 2016 when the amendment to the consent decree was signed. And we've made a lot of progress in the last couple of years. We are getting to the point where we are getting into, and in 2025, we will be in operations. And I think everybody it's hard to understand what that complexity of operations is. And what we try to depict with this picture is really all the simultaneous actions that are ongoing at any one point in time to actually live a day in the life of the effluent. So tank starts in the tank farms, goes through the tank site cesium extraction system, gets transferred into the prep tank in AP 106. It's fed into the low activity waste facility where it's vitrified. That vitrified waste ends up in the integrated disposal facility. And then for every 1 gallon that is actually processed, 2 gallons of off gas are created, or 2 gallons of condensate are created. And that is the effluent management facility that is expected to manage that liquid condensate and ultimately ETF that will support that. As you see across all of the other orange circles, that's all the infrastructure needs from HMIS and others that are truly there to support the project, as well as the 222S from a tank farms perspective that supports the front end delivery of feed. So it is truly a site-wide machine. It's integrated as a system. So any one portion of the system fails, the entirety of the system fails. So we've worked hard over the last 4 or 5 years to ensure all those interfaces are seamless and working together, and we'll continue to progress towards that 24/7 operating culture necessary to change from what has traditionally been, I'll say, days, weeks, and months to hours, sometimes minutes, hours, and days at the most when you look to operations. When you look at what facilities are supporting via law on slide 8, tank farms, we'll be retrieving in A and AX farm as feed, some of the feedstock. AP farm is actually the prep tanks. And where tank site cesium removal system actually is fed from. It then goes into the low activity waste facility. Effluent management facility, I think it's important to note that it's received over 40 upgrades and roughly $193 million improvements over the last 3 or 4 years, really doubling the capacity of throughput through that facility. So a big improvement there. And then for tank site cesium removal, I should have mentioned that we currently have 380,000 gallons of waste staged, and we're moving into batch 3 in the coming days. And we're set to stage of just right around 800,000 gallons by late summer. All in support of the tank waste mission. All the other facilities, low activity waste, effluent management laboratory, all the operations in 25, and then the laboratory is already built and supporting WTP or supporting tank farms, and then integrated disposal facility and LUR for the 2, I'll say, disposal pathways for all of the that's condensate, as well as the vitrified low activity waste coming off of the program. And those are working their way through final permitting, and they'll just be just-in-time facilities necessary to support operations. On to slide 9, fiscal year 25 and tank farms. As I think everybody knows, retrievals has been a big piece of where we're at. We're currently in AX 101, and that's scheduled to complete in 24. That's the 4th of 4. Following AX 101, we'll move into the A farm complex with A 101 as the first farm, our first tank within A farm. AP farm, I would note, I think everybody knows this, but I note the proximity of AP farm in relationship to WTP in the forefront of that picture, and really the importance of why that farm is selected, both from proximity, but also from an age. It's the newest of farms, built in 1986. And then from a west area standpoint, you can see there off in the distance, the west area, that's about a 7 mile from the way the crow flies. And we'll be starting the test bed initiative work. And then where we look to for future retrievals, that will be the next stop for future retrievals as we look to 2025 and the 2025 timeframe, getting prepped for that. And then lastly, for my last slide on slide 10, fiscal year 25 high level waste. as I spoke earlier, we have received, continue to see an increase. We saw $142 million in fiscal year 22, on $392 million in fiscal year 23, and projected to continue that. Hopefully, we'll continue that ramp, and this will allow us to really focus in on design, and then that work that is a limited risk of rework for construction standpoint. And we're saying that very deliberately because we're trying to get away, or not trying to, we're gonna get away from the historical design build simultaneous to a design then build. So we'll be making sure that the decisions we make for the scope that moves forward has systems at their 90% design, and that all the subsequent systems that are at less than 90%, we've done a deliberate look at each of those to ensure there's no significant risk of rework on that system, to make the decision then to move it into that bucket of limited to no risk of rework construction. We'll be authorizing that as we go through time based on those systems being completed between now and roughly 27 is when design is complete. Following that, we go through the standard process for baseline development and then into final baseline all with a goal to treat waste in the 2036 timeframe. And with that, I'll pass it off to Bill.
Good evening. I'm Bill Hamill. I'm the Assistant Manager for River and Plateau. I'm on slide 11. I'm going to talk about the Richland Operations Office budget. This covers basically two big areas that the AMs have, the assistant managers have. This budget covers the River and Plateau, work, and plus Brian Harkin's infrastructure, which he will talk about in a little bit. I'm going to walk through very quickly the slide and talk to you about the areas. As you can see, we have the enacted budget. We do not have the president's budget for 24. And then we'll be talking about our priorities for 25. So real quickly, if you run through this, you can kind of see the different PBSs. The first one of note here is basically the solid waste stabilization and disposition. That's low-level waste, mixed low-level waste, and true and waste activity, other waste activities. The next one is actually a control point. That's our WESA modification and capsule storage. That's the cesium strontium capsules. The next one is our groundwater plus circuit documentation. That's our pump and treats and the operations associated with that. RL 201, that's Brian's work, and that is the Hanford Site-Wide Services, basically infrastructure that keeps us all running. And there are 4 projects beneath that that are specific to the infrastructure that are important to keeping everything running in Hanford. Brian will talk about those. The next two, RL 40 and RL 41. RL 40 is basically the canyons, the D&D work. RL 41 is the river closure projects, basically the work that's going on in the K area. Then the next one down there, given the nature of what we do in Hanford, we need a safeguards and securities budget, and that is important for regarding our infrastructure and our computer systems and everything associated with those. The next one is the FFTF, the plant fast flux test facility and the D&D with there of note there that is non-defense funding. Then, of course, RL 100, which is the Richland Community and Regulatory Support. And that gives you your total sum. Moving on to slide 12, we start to talk about our priorities. So what you see in the top left is the building hot cell core removal. That is the mock-up of that. In 25, we're hoping to actually start that work. Obviously, the reason why we're showing the mock-up is because we haven't done that yet. But this shows you kind of what we're doing, what we're planning on. Next to that is the structural modifications, also anticipated to start preparations for that in the 25 time period. So you take the floor up and you move the soils beneath it, you begin preparation for stabilizing the facility. Beneath that, you have our WESIP. You can see that we have equipment there. That is in the mock-up stage currently. What happens is that goes through the mock-up, then it goes to installation and testing, And then it goes to deployment in the 24 and 25 time period. And we start capsule load. Two pictures on the side, basically, they're indicative of our groundwater program. As Greg indicated, that is a important priority for us. That basically treats the 2.2 billion gallons groundwater per year. So summarizing kind of our priorities, and these are our priorities. There's other work that goes on during this time period, but K area, and that is basically going to be the K area West fuel basin demo preparation and the demolition is in the time period of 2025. The Wessup capsule, basically the finishing up of the test equipment and the stuff. The Wessup capsule, the building 324 work, which is basically at that point will be finishing removing the floor, the soil underneath. In parallel with that, prepping the facility for demolition. Also during that time period, a priority for us will be starting true waste shipping. So we'll be doing that. Of course, we have our groundwater going on at that time period. We do that every year. So that's kind of a summary of what our priorities are. And those are all risk reduction priorities. You know, the risk reduction work takes into account the safety of the people and the workers, and also focuses on risk reduction to the environment. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brian Harkins for infrastructure.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks for coming out tonight. Infrastructure is one of those areas that, we don't hear much about unless something goes wrong. The water doesn't work, the bathrooms don't work, those kind of things. We don't really think about it, but it is important. So there's two parts to our infrastructure program. The shorter, easier discussion is to talk about the work to prepare for future work activities. As we progress the cleanup mission, we need to ensure that the infrastructure is ready for those activities to start. The second part, which is a lot bigger part of our program, is really preparing or ensuring that we have safe and reliable infrastructure to support the current cleanup mission. So if you take the water supply system, for example, some of those pumps have been in service since 1943. And so part of our processes are now to go through and look at those areas for where we might have a failure in our system that would impact our operations. So as we start up the BIT plant, we need to be able to ensure that we have safe and reliable 24/7 operations. That means infrastructure components have to be upgraded and modernized. It means that we have the staff and personnel to be able to address issues in a timely manner, so that a loss of electrical supply like occurred here a few weeks ago with the big windstorm, we're able to react and return those electrical systems back to service in a timely manner. So we have a mix of programs, as I mentioned, in both preparing for future work as well as evaluating current activities and to see that they will be reliable. To just give you one example of a reliability type project. So we'll start hopefully the construction of a new 230 kV line through the site here about mid-March. And that is lined up for a power outage at the Energy Northwest in 25. The reason we're doing that upgrade is because when we looked at time, they were degraded. The outer casing had degraded, and some of the strands were non-conductive at this time. So to be able to ensure reliable long-term power supply for future cleanup missions, we have a project to replace that line. It's a joint fund, DOE funding the project. The is the construction lead on the work activities. But as you think about it, there's a tremendous amount of utilities out there in the site. It's like a city. You know, you have workers out there, so you have sewer and water supplies, roads that have to be maintained, power, telephone, fiber optics, all of those components that are necessary to support future operation. So with that, we will go next.
Thank you so much. Just a quick note, as we go through, if you were looking at the 2 pages for ORP and RL that showed the budget number, just wanted to indicate that there are some thousands behind there that might be confusing for numbers, just to bring up some clarity there. So sometimes we run out of space for all the zeros. And if we want, thank you. So yes, on here you would note that those would have thousands behind them so that you can see the number. Thank you for going with that. All right, and then we'll just go to our last 2 slides, please. Show our social media. So please join our social media. We also know Ecology does a good job of trying to communicate that way. And one of our new efforts to be more environmentally friendly is our QR code. If you'll use your phone and go to that code, if you're getting printed email delivered at home and you'd like to switch to either ending that completely or switching over to electronic distribution, that will take you straight to an email, and you can just type in your email address and your physical address, and we'll make that switch for you. And next slide, please. Of course, our virtual tours as well. And now, today launches our comment period. It will run through April 5th. We only accept comments submitted in writing. We can take them via the mail. We prefer electronic, but any way it can get to us, we appreciate all the comments. Just send it to cleanupriorities@rl.gov. Thank you very much. And now, John, would you like to go first? And then we'd like to close. John Price with Ecology.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I'm John Price with the Department of Ecology. So I think what I'm going to say is going to track pretty well with what you heard from Bill Hamill and Tom Fletcher. I probably am going to say it a little bit differently and have a little more emphasis on tri-party agreement milestones, but I think there's a lot of agreement. So go ahead and go to my second slide there. Okay, so we've been in negotiations with the Department of Energy and EPA for going on 5 years on tank waste schedules. And those are changing and adding schedules for the tank waste consent decree that was finalized in 2010 and also tri-party agreement milestones. We're hopeful that we'll reach a settlement this year, which will go out for public comment. All these priorities for tank waste will be exactly in accordance with whatever we agreed to in that settlement. And then kind of going over to something Tom mentioned, there are recent appropriations to complete the high-level waste building, and we definitely support that. And then again, stating the obvious, which Tom stated, we do support the direct feed low activity waste startup and processing. And then finally, Tom also mentioned the test bed initiative. Ecology supports that. That's an effort to take tank waste and treat it commercially and dispose of it off-site. And Ecology is poised to support the DOE on getting that permitted and getting it done. So that's under a prior appropriation, so it's not a priority for this year's appropriation. Go ahead and go to my next slide, please. So I think it was last year, the Department of Energy Richland Operations Office asked Ecology and EPA to start looking at work at Hanford in 3-year chunks. So I'm going to talk about work in 3-year chunks rather than just in terms of fiscal year 25 priorities. So not necessarily something that shows up on the DOE funding list, but a big priority for Ecology is getting the Hanford site-wide dangerous waste permit issued. And so we're assuming that DOE will have the money to work on their permitting side of things. So that's a big thing for us. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to look at work in the Richland Operations Office in 3 years packages. And I'm going to emphasize existing tri-party agreement milestones. Okay, go ahead to the next slide, please. So treating and managing radioactive solid waste under existing TPA milestones is a big priority for us. There's thousands of waste containers in the central waste complex, and there's more waste containers waiting to be retrieved and also processed. So I called out a few milestones here. There's some large boxes stored outside of the central waste complex. DOE's been doing a good job of taking those big boxes, sending them to the Perma-Fix facility, getting the waste repackaged and having it sent back to the central waste complex to be stored and wait for shipment to the waste isolation pilot plant in Carlsbad, New Mexico. So we're looking to see that work continued and get pretty darn close to having all those outdoor boxes repackaged. There's also some ramp up work for a new facility to process all packages faster and get those ready to ship to the waste isolation pilot plant. I guess I can say WIP because I've got an asterisk there. And then finally, we're looking forward to 2026 and DOE starting to certify true waste for shipment down to WIP. So the milestones are listed there. Another waste stream at Hanford is sodium, which is a reactive metal. So in 2026, there's a milestone for DOE to get started on the engineering design for a facility to convert that sodium to a non-reactive form so that it can be safely disposed of. And then finally, Bill already mentioned the cesium and strontium capsules and getting those moved out of the waste encapsulation storage facility and onto dry and fast storage. And we definitely support that as a priority. So we've got the milestones for that there. Okay, next page, please. So looking ahead, we want to see some new milestones for the next 3 years worth of work. The so-called D4 work, and I won't say all those words there, but you can read them. That's always a priority for DOE and it is for us too, because we recognize that it supports a stable workforce and gets work done. So we definitely support developing some new milestones for D4 work over the next 3 years. And then a longtime priority for ecology has been work on what we call the deep vadose zone, which is contamination in the soil above the water table. It's deep enough that it can't be dug up and disposed of in an environmental restoration disposal facility. So DOE's been looking for a number of years for new technologies to help address that contamination. And it's both in some what we call waste sites in a specific grouping and also occurs around the single shell tank farm. So we're looking forward to a milestone in 2026 for DOE to submit to us a report on potential new technologies for treating that contamination in the ground as it is rather than digging up and treating it. And I think I'll just go to the last slide and there's the contact information for ecology if you have questions. Thank you.
Good evening and thank you for being here, both in person and online. Really appreciate that. And I'm Dave Inn with PA here in Richland. I'm going to keep it pretty short because really the purpose of this is to hear from you. And I think you're going to hear a lot of what folks gone before me. We share a lot of the very same priorities. And our message is we express our EPA expresses our priorities and incorporates them into milestones. And like John talked about, the river corridor cleanup, the Central Plateau cleanup, maintaining the progress on the things we're doing. The need for the stable workforce, but yet by the same token, you need to have soil when you go to dispose of that earth. So those are kind of the things you typically hear from us. We got those commitments and we expect, and we all have a responsibility to make those commitments that we put forward. And again, if we have to adjust the milestones, priority due to whether it's a budget or an event, then we have to discuss that together. And again, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on any specific milestone, but we do have a lot of commonality here, and we just really want to hear from you. So, thank you.
All right, and now it's our chance to hear the questions that people have both virtually and in the room. Is there someone in the room who would like to ask a question? This is Susan Lefband, our longtime head chair.
Thank you. It's good to see all you again. there's a lot of trench ready waste on the Hanford side, and historically, we're last in line. Are there any concerns that there will be with open and space for the true, considering that it has been a priority, but lower on the funding schedule? And I know that there have been some concerns in the past that lift might not be available for our troops.
The short answer is no, but let me talk a little bit, on detail why I say that. We are in constant, communication with, to make sure that we're working with them to get, we're actually doing planning right now to get prepared, if you will. There's a lot of work that goes on to the certification, as you know. So we are discussing with them, when and where those pieces and parts fall. So there is a lot of coordination that's ongoing. There will be a lot of coordination during that time period. It's actually in WIP's best interest to get us up and operational. So with Idaho and Los Alamos shipping, if something happens where the shipments fall and there's a hole, they will want us to have surge capacity to fill those. So we want to be ready to do that. So actually, it's mutually beneficial to everybody to have Hanford up and operational. So I think the short answer is no. We're working together to get there. We are in communication with them. There will be a lot of activity at this time period. So it's going to be a priority not only for us, but for WIP, because when the waste actually runs out, at Idaho and Los Alamos, work slows down. They've got staffing and capability they will want to fill. So that's going to be very important for them. So the short answer is there's not a concern, there's not a competition right now. We need to work together to make sure we're ready. They need the waste that we're ready to ship. That's really the bottom line.
I see several hands in the audience, so I'll get to everyone as quickly as we can, and I think I saw Chris come up next.
Can you talk about the cleanup activities and potential path forward for 6/18/11?
6/18/11, we have recently negotiated a set of milestones concerning 6/18/11. Those are in progress right now. That work is ongoing and will continue to be ongoing. There will be 6/18/11 work ongoing in the 25 time period. So that will continue. So there is that activity and there's a schedule to get you that information. But it basically mirrors the milestones that have been recently negotiated.
All right, let's give our folks who are participating virtually a chance. Colleen, is there anyone in the chat?
We have 4 people in the queue in the chat. The first question is from Dan Solitz. Dan Solitz, if you want to unmute yourself to ask your question, or I can go ahead and take a look at your question in the chat. He said he would like more detail on the RL 0100.
Work-based structure, public outreach.
Yeah, did you want to ask your full question?
Well, just would like some more, a more detailed breakdown of where that money's going and how much is there? I saw the figure, but I forgot it. Also, one other question I have, how many people are in the live audience?
So I'll answer the second question. There's maybe 25 in the live audience here tonight. So that one's easy. Community Web Source PBS 100 is a PBS that has morphed over the years. Currently, it supports payment in lieu of taxes. It supports what's called a Washington Military Grant. So it's an emergency preparedness activity to ensure that the surrounding counties are able to respond to emergencies.
And there's one other piece, Mark, I'm missing, have costs. And have costs, yeah, and that's basically the majority of the components of PBS 100. It used to have the regulator, funding in it for circular grant and mixed waste fee, but that's now funded out of PBS 201, so.
All right, thank you. And then for those who are joining us via the telephone only, *6 to unmute. Do we have anyone who's phone only? Please go ahead and ask your question. All right, not hearing any. I'll check back with folks on the phone before we go around, and we'll go back to folks in the room. And I don't recall who was next.
Yeah.
Hi, thanks for being here, guys. I was just wondering if you could give me a kind of a brief summary of the melter restart, what kind of shape that was in. Brian kind of suggested it was going to be the beginning of March, and we're kind of.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll make it brief, since we want to make sure we stay focused on priorities for 25. But what we've determined is we did have some vulnerabilities in the Joule heating power supply. Those, we've ordered the components. They are being fabricated and shipped. We expect those to arrive by mid-April, and it'll put us about 6 to 8 weeks, or 8 to 10 weeks about before we get into restart activities based on those component deliveries. We are seeing what we can do to accelerate that, but that's where we are. Following I'll say the completion of that for the original issue, which was the startup heater, which has been solved. We're good to go there, as well as discharge heaters. We just want to make sure that we do it methodically, and a couple of months is way better than the loss of a melter. So that's where we're at.
All right, I believe Pam Larson was next.
Thank you. 2 questions. John, you mentioned the sodium. Is that the sodium left over from cooling from FFT that needs to be resigned? Okay, and then my second question is, at the end of February in the Federal Register, there was information about the WEIR and what the determination was from DOE headquarters. So I'm curious what you all feel about how that impacts the second phase of testbed initiative and also supplemental waste treatment. Thank you.
So a couple of things. The VLAW WEIR, so there's 2 WEIRs in process. So the VLAW WEIR, which was signed in the January timeframe, really supports DFLAW, the disposal of I'll say secondary waste. So basically solidified waste coming out of the process, HEPA filters and others. So that's one WEIR. The second WEIR, which is expected to be signed any timeframe now, is a WEIR supporting TBI specifically. And it, of course, is I'll say the first step of getting to where supplemental treatment will end up, or could end up. I guess I have a better way to say it, because there's no decisions made on that. But we are all focused on getting us through TBI and into supplemental treatment or into alternative treatment in the future.
And let's go back and join the folks in the chat. Colleen, who's next, please?
Next on our queue is Liz Matson. And Liz Matson was asking for some clarification on the True. And she wanted to know, did I hear that they are shipping True in 2025?
Well, good, fun. Yeah, we, in 2025, we will begin preparations for those preparations include standing up the certification program, getting the expertise, looking at the facilities, and kind of all those preparations. The goal would be to ship through by 2028. We're actually hoping to beat that, but that's really our goal. So for 2025, because of not really wrong, but because of the preparations you need to take and do to get to the point where you can certify the waste and stand up that capability, you have to start in 2025.
She said, thank you for the clarification.
Anyone else?
Yes, next on our list is Gail Clement. Gail, you can unmute if you would like to ask your question.
Yes, I'm
And
on mute.
Okay.
My question is regarding the deep vadose. What is the depth and apparent thickness of that vadose? And have you identified the technology that you're going to use to treat it? I couldn't hear very clearly.
But go ahead. I'm gonna, with respect to the, technologies, there are a number of studies John's referring to, I believe, that the college is very interested in looking at, and we do have that work ongoing. And have to get to the, do you know the depth and this
It
opportunity?
would be deeper than 8 feet down to 250 feet, which is where the water table is.
It's between 80 and 250 feet down.
Okay, so basically you're saying that you have not identified a specific technology, but you're in the process of reviewing the research. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Tom?
Hello, everybody. Tom Cecilia, Oregon Department of Energy. Just wanted to, a couple questions. One of them, there's a third weir going on the WAC tank farm, wondering if there's an update on that process. And also, I heard that there was some cleanup projects going on in 2025. That's great, with the 324 building soils and K West basin. Where is the next wave of waste site characterization going to prepare for cleanup down the road a little more, like Central Plateau, getting ready to the decision for soil waste sites in there?
Okay, in the 24-25 time period, we do know that there will be RODs, you know, if everything holds the schedule, right? On the McKay areas, so those will be ongoing. Depending on how things play out, I would expect IA1 to be in some phase of implementation during that time period. So those are 3 examples of some of the decision documentation that will be done during that time period.
And you are correct, there is a third weir, but I do not have a status on it, so with Delmar not here, I'll have to, we'll have to get back that answer.
Any other questions in the room? Susan has one.
We talked about the holistic negotiations and that they've been going on for 5 years. What the hell's taking so long? And is there no sense of urgency? And the reason I ask this question is that we had historically asked several questions about what's going on with this or what's going on with that thing. Oh, we can't talk about it because it's in the holistic negotiations. So there's this huge curtain over all of that. Is there no sense of urgency to get that completed? So that we can actually be a little more transparent and get questions answered? Thank you.
Susan, I understand the big question. I definitely understand the concern. I would say the opposite. We had the actual principles together 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, which was Ike White as well as Laura Watson, DOJ principal as well as AGU principal, having kind of some dialogues on the final components. So hopefully, as John said, we're nearing that finish line and that shroud list, for lack of a better word. I can't speak in detail more than that.
No ETA.
We've been saying the next 12 months for months, so.
Yes, for years.
So I'm not putting the ETA out there because I really don't know. I mean, we are working those final elements of just a couple pieces.
Thanks.
Colleen?
Yeah.
Next in chat.
Next in our chat with a question is Dan Saris. And can you go ahead and unmute your phone and go ahead and ask your question, Dan?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Great. Thank you. On the river corridor, it was hard to hear the beginning of the presentation. So just wanted to ask, what are the TPA agencies expecting for studies and plans around 100K and 100N? And just to take a little step back, there are big challenges along the river. And so we're always a little concerned when we hear language like being off the river or nearly complete when contamination levels seem to be persistent and still very elevated. So we're expecting those problems to take years, potentially decades to address. So kind of to bring it back to the point, what are the expectations for when we would see final RIFSs for 100K and 100N and final proposed plans?
So let me talk about, there's a lot in that, so it's like 3 questions there. So let's talk a little bit about the rods that were going on in that time period. The K and N rods are anticipated to be ongoing that time period. Now, the next step would be then to get the remedial action work plans. So those, for both K and N, so those are projected to be in the 24/25 time period. Other things that will be ongoing in that time period was the K West Fuel Basin demo prep and then the actual demolition. With respect to your concern about, the river, we have an extensive network up there where we are doing pump and treats, and we're doing groundwater monitoring. And that has shown that area over time with the pump and treats to actually be reducing the chromium values as they have migrated this moving north. So that's shown to be a effective remediation. Those pump and treats are going to be ongoing during that time period. And when we're talking about the priorities during the 25 time period, and groundwater is a huge priority for us. It's, the pump and treat for 2.2 million gallons. And we will continue to do that, monitor that, and monitor the effectiveness of that. So that area is of importance to us. It is reflected in our priorities. It's reflected through the pump and treat. It's reflected through the K West demo and also through the rods and K and N.
Any other questions in the chat?
Yes, we do have more. The next question is from Aaron Warwick. And Aaron's question, how can you move forward without awarding a contract to run the operation? When will that be happening and why has it taken so long?
Yeah. So contracting process is the process that goes through. I would just say we've never been closer. That date is not here yet. And I do not have a specific ETA. It's not run out of our local area. It's ran out of headquarters processes. So it's ongoing and we've never been closer. I will say that we will continue to have WRPS manage the tank farms and manage the operations of the tank farms until such time that transition has happened.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Any other questions in the room? Okay, Tom.
DOE every year prepares a compliant level budget and a target level budget. And there's a huge difference typically between those two budget numbers. The question is, how does DOE briefly establish the actual activities for cleanup for fiscal 2025 in this case, based on the target level budget? What you go through in terms of establishing how much money is going into each WPS that will still overall roll up into the target level budget? Is it risk-based? Is it overall milestone progress based? How do you actually proceed with that process? Because that determines the actual cleanup activities.
I'll kick it off and then I'll hand it to Greg or anybody else that wants to add in, but you kind of go back to slide 4 of the packet. That top line bar really defines the process in which we use to have to get us to the budget build for 2025. Clearly, we have a 12088 compliance number that's required for executive order. We always submit that. But as you look to it, we start with the strategic vision. We work with the regulators on the Hanford integrated priority list, really looking at what are our priorities from just a pure priority standpoint. And then we have our 5-year plan as well as the annual update. And along each of those, we have public input. The idea is that as we go through this process, we understand where those priorities lie. We can rank them top to bottom. And when we get an appropriation, we understand, okay, if that's the appropriation, here's what's going to fall off the list. And that's the way it does everyone, every team, every project. And we've done that for 3 or 4 years running, 5 years running. And it's been pretty successful. It's not perfect, but it's been pretty good to this point. Anything? John or?
Yeah, so we don't know what DOE's target level funding is. Our assumption is, I'll divide it into the two offices. Our assumption is for the tank waste mission, that whatever DOE signs up to for the settlement agreement, that they think they can get funding for that. What you saw on the DOE Richland side is Ecology at least is really focused on what the milestones are that are already in place. And then looking forward, we're assuming that DOE is negotiating new milestones with us based on what they think they'll get in target funding. So that's how we deal with it.
No, the only other thing I want to add is, again, when we get the budget from Congress, then we have to get together as 3 parties and figure out if we have to make some changes. And it's a collective decision that we have to make.
All right, my clock shows 6:30, so we have come to the end of our hour-long meeting time, but we want to make sure that everyone has had a chance to answer a question. Are there any more questions in the audience? All right, seeing none, we will move to the chat.
Our next question is from Rob Davis. His question, how does your future harmonize with the WEIR, the FFRDC report, AOA with respect to the single shell tank risk? And Rob, if you're on the line, feel free to unmute if you need to add to that question.
Yeah, I'm online here. I see that we have done great things and we're working towards a future. And the FFRDC conclusions are really not a surprise to anybody. The AOA, again, is not a surprise to anybody. The WEIRs being accomplished also aren't. So we're posed for a huge potential risk reduction in single shell tanks if we accept some of the FFRDC recommendation. So are we all on board for this? Are we designing our future, in 2025 future, towards those goals of the great risk reduction that we can accomplish? I mean, I think we all assume that we're going to have at least another 1 or 2 tank leaks in the next, between now and 2050. And so, so I really think it's important that we do that. And so I guess I'm asking you guys, are we tending to go that way? Is that what we're looking at? Is that going to be our future? Thanks.
Thanks, John. I'll say something too.
So Rob, I would just say that we are working our way through those processes and those decisions. They are not a decision that we can make in whole. It's going to take the understanding of TBI. It's going to take the outcome of holistic negotiations. While we definitely have a set foundation started, we got to get through the rest of those decisions to ultimately make that the future.
Yeah, and I guess I would say all those things you listed are things that we can use as foundations for our decisions. They're not decision documents per se, so they're all helpful. We won't follow them exactly.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. We want risk reduction. Thank you.
I want to check and make sure if anyone is on the telephone only, they have a chance to ask a question. *6 to unmute. Right, not hearing anyone on the phone. And then Colleen, you said there was one person who had not had a chance to ask a question yet.
Right, there's one other question. I'm not sure of the name. They're registered as a guest. The question, hi everybody, and thanks for the great overview. I was wondering about TBI. Is that moving forward now? What has caused the delay and which concerns are left?
So TBI was I'll say a purposeful decision and priorities of making sure we're applying our resources to effectuate DF law as our top priority. And that's where we're at. Now we're to the point where we're getting close to signing the weir. We'll be resubmitting the permit application with John and Ecology. And working towards, working to actually put that into motion, later this year, early next, this calendar year, or this fiscal year, early next.
All right, thank you, Tom. Now, all the questions in the room have been answered. There's no one on the phone only. I believe we have a couple of people in the chat who would like to ask a second question, wanting to be respectful of your time. You have time for 2 more and then we'll wrap it up. All right. That way we can answer all the questions. So please go ahead.
Right, okay, so our last 2 coming back with questions are Liz Matson and Dan Saris. So Liz, why don't we go to you first? I think you had a follow-up question.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you now.
I had an earlier question and maybe about funding levels for FY25 and what ideal funding levels, if each agency could talk about what the ideal numbers would be for RL and ORP. I know we're not sharing numbers, but if it's possible to share the ideal numbers, that would be great. And then I may have missed it, but are you accepting comments on the budget and cleanup priorities? Thanks.
So we don't have an ideal number. Really today, we're focused on the priority aspect of it and getting that input. And then that will go into the budget build, which will ultimately build to the, I'll say the 12088 compliance number, and then where we get the line drawn, the line gets drawn. What we're really trying to focus on is the feedback for the public priorities. And to your second question, Liz, yes, we do want feedback. If you look at the last page of the presentation, it gives you the email address and or mail address to submit that to.
Destin, would you mind moving to that slide, please? That's a very good point, Liz. Thank you. Some of you may not have been able to hear that off the top. And there it is. We're accepting comments, both electronic and print, to cleanup priorities at rl.gov. You can see the address on the screen if you'd like to send them in via the traditional mail. It opens today and it will be open through April 5th. And then was there one more question?
Yes, the last follow-up question is from Dan Saris. Do you want to unmute your phone and ask the question, Dan?
Sure. I'm just curious about the status of the progress towards the leak response plan for the single shell tanks. That was, I think, due to Ecology in August of 2023, and there were a couple other 2023 deadlines in the agreed order, and I'm just curious if you're on track to meet those. Thanks.
I don't know that everything I understand is we're working on that, and I don't know that they're not on track to meet those at this point. They're behind. Yeah, neither has John.
All right, I do believe we have had the pleasure of answering all the questions. On behalf of all the tri-party agreement agencies, we want to sincerely thank you for coming. We thank you for your time. Every comment is read and considered carefully. To our presenters, thank you for coming and sharing your information and answering questions. We have dropped an evaluation in the chat for you to fill it out. If you're leaving here, there's a QR code on the desk as you walk out the door where you can fill out a survey and tell us how we did, see how we can improve. And so we'll conclude with a thank you and wish you a pleasant evening.